What does it mean when the number everyone's panicking about turns out to be true? And the explanation everyone's assuming turns out to be wrong? In one day, close to 50,000 people crossed into a small Spanish territory on the North African coast. A migration researcher who spent decades studying exactly this kind of surge looked at the number and said one thing immediately: this has nothing to do with Spain. 50,000 people is genuinely enormous. For context, fewer than 40,000 people arrived from the entire continent of Africa at every single Spanish border combined, across all of last year. So something happened. The question is what and where the decision actually got made. Ceuta is a Spanish city of about 85,000 people, sitting on the North African coast, separated from Morocco by a fence and a stretch of water. On the day this story is about, roughly 50,000 additional people arrived, some over a border wall, some through the sea, swimming stretches of open water to reach Spanish territory. One person who made that crossing described it simply: over the beach, over a wall, then 200 meters through open water. Another said they didn't know what would happen to them next. These aren't statistics with names attached. They're statements made by people who had just arrived, with no idea yet whether they'd be allowed to stay. Here's the detail most coverage left out entirely. Ceuta and its sister territory Melilla are Spanish. They're the European Union's only land borders with Africa. But they are not part of the passport-free Schengen travel zone that covers most of the rest of the continent. Arriving in Ceuta doesn't mean arriving in Europe's open interior. It means arriving in a sealed pocket that Spain still has to process, contain, or return people from, one crossing at a time. Ceuta and Melilla have been more than two dots on a map for decades. They are the European Union's outer border, sitting on African soil, and that makes them leverage. Since the 1990s, these fences have been where Europe tests the border tools it later exports everywhere else: high steel walls, pushbacks, quiet deals with the neighboring government. Underneath the fence is a relationship: Spain, Morocco, and the EU, tied together by trade, fishing rights, visas, and the unresolved status of Western Sahara. Migration has become one of the recurring levers inside that relationship. Not the only one, but one of the most visible. There's even a football tournament tangled up in it. Morocco co-hosts the 2030 World Cup alongside Spain and Portugal. One more stage where these same governments keep having to work with each other, whether they want to or not. This isn't the first time. In 2021, roughly 6,000 people crossed into Ceuta in a similarly sudden surge. At the time, one migration researcher tracking the pattern noticed something specific. Morocco was unhappy with a Spanish foreign policy decision, and within days of that decision, the number of people allowed to approach the border spiked. The specific dispute in 2021 was over Western Sahara, a territory Morocco claims, and a political movement called the Polisario Front disputes. Spain had allowed a Polisario leader to receive medical treatment on Spanish soil. Morocco objected. And then, for a few days, the border controls that normally limit crossings loosened, until Spain adjusted its position, after which the same border tightened again, and people who had crossed were returned within days. There's a reason returns can happen this fast, and it goes back further than this year, or even 2021. Spain and Morocco signed a bilateral readmission agreement back in 1992, one of the first of its kind in Europe. In simple terms, it lets Spain send certain people back across this specific border without the full asylum process that would normally apply elsewhere on EU territory. That's part of why Ceuta and Melilla work so well as a pressure point in the first place. The legal machinery for a fast reversal was already built, decades before anyone needed it at this scale. None of this is unique to Spain and Morocco. Fast-track return agreements like this exist at several of Europe's external borders. What makes Ceuta and Melilla different is how directly the pace of enforcement on the Moroccan side can be turned up or down, and how quickly that shows up in the numbers on the Spanish side of the fence. Brussels has stayed carefully quiet about naming names. The European Union's border agency monitors what happens at Ceuta and Melilla closely. It has to, since these are EU external borders by definition. But publicly pointing at Rabat for orchestrating a surge is diplomatically expensive, so the public statements tend to focus on humanitarian response and border management capacity, not on the political trigger everyone privately understands. A migration researcher who has studied exactly this pattern for years put it in blunt terms. When arrival numbers spike this suddenly, this dramatically, it has almost never been an accident on the Spanish side. It has been, in his words, a political decision made in Rabat, with a goal attached to it, not a failure of Spanish border policy, a choice made across the border by a government that controls how tightly its own side gets policed. That doesn't make the 21st century's version of this any less real for the people caught inside it. Nearly 600 people were reported still waiting on the Moroccan side, hoping for their own chance to cross, drawn by word that opportunity existed on the other side of that fence, even from people who'd already learned, on arrival, how hard the reality was underneath that word. And for anyone assuming this means open borders across the rest of Europe, in the first half of this year, fewer people arrived in the EU from Africa than in the years before it. Fewer than 300 Moroccan nationals applied for asylum in Germany specifically. The surge was real. It was also, by the numbers, contained to exactly the place someone wanted it contained to. A few days after the footage you saw at the start of this video, the picture had already changed. A large share of the people who made it to Ceuta were sent back. Some by choice, many under heavy pressure. Morocco pulled its border guards back up. Spain reinforced the fences and patrols. That's the dial this story has been about the whole time. Same border, same people mostly. But the flow doesn't run one way for long. It runs exactly as long as the message needs it to. Back in Spain, the reaction split along predictable lines. Some officials called for tougher border enforcement and faster deportations. Others argued the numbers proved Spain needed a more coordinated European response, not just a national one. Both sides were arguing about the same 50,000 people, and neither side controlled the one government actually deciding how many of them showed up in the first place. So the real question was never really about Spain's border. It's about how easily 50,000 people can become a message, sent by one government, read by another, with the people actually crossing the water somewhere in between, understood by neither side as anything other than the point being made.